it's time to talk about how Black Lives Matter kind of sometimes depends on the context, really. Now, the subject of this particular segment, for the most part, is going to be focusing on somebody who you would be forgiven for not remembering her name. The name is Sasha Johnson, a Black Lives Matter activist / radical BLM leader who in May of last year got shot while she was involved in a sort of a back garden silent disco party in Peckham. And you may remember this, or more likely you may not, because after certain circumstances, after certain information regarding the circumstances of the shooting emerged, all of a sudden you find the mainstream media dropped it. So let's go through a bit of a reminder, a refresher, if you want, on what's going on, what happened. This is the article from 24th of May last year. Prominent Black Lives Matter activist Sasha Johnson is critically ill after being shot in the head, her party says. The 27-year-old has life-threatening injuries following the shooting on Consort Road in Peckham, South London. At a vigil, they threw a vigil for her, obviously. One speaker told the crowd, in every community there are good eggs and bad eggs, and we have to make sure that those bad eggs are held accountable for their actions, because it's not acceptable for those bad eggs to be attacking our warriors, be they male or female. Warriors who are out there every day without pay, working for our families, working for our communities, which this statement will turn out to be very ironic in terms of holding people accountable, as we find out as the story will unfold. But the important thing to point out there is that they're deifying her as some kind of warrior, working for our families, working for our communities. As many of you may be aware of, she was a very, very radical person. She advocated for basically separatist communities with black people within the UK. She also advocated for enslavement of white people as reparations. So she was not what I would describe as a good person, but I would still argue that she did not deserve to be shot in the way that she was, and she certainly doesn't deserve to be in the condition that she's in currently, because as far as I'm aware, she was mainly advocating for positions and hadn't actually, gone out and committed any violent crimes or anything to further. Yes, here we see Black Lives Matter's Twitter page from last year talking about Sasha Johnson is in critical condition after being shot in the head in London. Black activists like Sasha receive death threats daily. As a black woman and an activist, her life has been under scrutiny and attack from the start. Starting to form a narrative here. There's only one reason that she could have been shot, and you can tell what that is. It will have been racism. She gets death threats daily. Even big brain, galaxy brain Diane Abbott decided to wade in with black activist Sasha Johnson in hospital in critical condition after sustaining a gunshot wound to the head. Nobody should potentially pay with their life because they stood up for racial justice.
So she's basically just trying to propagate the idea that she was shot for standing up for racial injustice.
Yes, there are big assumptions being made, and one of the things that is very implicit in that is standing up for racial justice. Only one person could have, one type of person could have shot her. Obviously supposed to be a white person, a white racist person, is the narrative that was being pushed for about a day, until there were 5 people arrested on suspicion of the shooting. Officers at first arrested a 17-year-old boy on Tuesday afternoon following a stop and search in South London. He was arrested on suspicion of possession of an offensive weapon and possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. Further investigations led police to an address in Peckham where 3 men, aged 18, 19 and 28, were all arrested on suspicion of affray and possession with intent to supply Class B drugs. 25-year-old man was also held later in the evening following a police chase. The Met said he'd been arrested in suspicion of affray and failing to stop for police. All 5 were also later arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. So they got these guys, and as we'll find out in a bit, they looked into them and discovered that they may have something to do with the killing. I don't mean to be crass here, but can you guess? Can you answer this simple question? Were any of these people white?
Let me guess. No.
No, they were all black. As such, the story vanished. Black Lives Matter, far from living up to their name and intentions, that tweet is the only mention I can find online of them even referencing Sasha Johnson beyond her own chapter.
So this holy status that she was almost given from being a victim of white supremacy that never existed now disappears because it's not a case of white supremacy.
Exactly.
So now the news doesn't care about her at all.
It happens every single time. And as we'll find out from this next article, which is the most recent update regarding this story is from yesterday, that whole we need to hold the bag eggs in our communities accountable. Yeah, turns out it doesn't work that way. Charges dropped against suspects accused of shooting British BLM leader after witnesses refuse to cooperate. The group of suspects accused of shooting Sasha Johnson in the head have had... and you can also see here, that picture on the left, quite gruesome, not nice to see.
That's horrible, isn't
That's
it?
the condition that she's in. She was a mother,
Oh,
she is a mother. I believe that she might be semi-conscious because of the fact that she is paralyzed on one side, so they must be able to tell that. She might not be conscious, though. It's just, I've heard varying
astonishing
positions.
that she's alive.
It's awful, yeah. She's got a massive chunk missing from her skull and therefore her brain as well, as you can imagine. Not nice. She wasn't a nice person, not the sort of person that I would support. In fact, the sort of person that I would condemn, but I'm not going to celebrate the fact that she was shot and has been left in this condition. Yeah, so the suspects accused of shooting her in the head have had their charges dropped after witnesses have refused to cooperate with the police investigation. A trial was set to start in March against 4 men charged over the shooting. However, at a hearing last week, prosecutors said it could not go ahead for reasons that could not be set out fully in open court. According to the prosecution, the case was based on circumstantial evidence with no direct evidence identifying any of the defendants as Johnson's attackers. The trial, scheduled to begin on March 7, was nixed after prosecution announced at last Tuesday's hearing it would not be pursuing the case following this review. Detailing the high-profile case in court, prosecutor Mark Hayward, QC, said he wasn't able to give the full reasons for the prosecution's decision, but provided details as to why the Crown Prosecution Service had no other option.
Right.
The CCTV analysis, phone cell site and cell data showed that the 4 defendants had planned and conducted surveillance of the house before carrying out the attack with murderous intent on one or more of the partygoers. So as far as I can tell from this, it was basically just supposed to be a drive-by on a particular person or maybe a few particular people, and it was just that this Sasha Johnson happened to be in the area.
Oh God!
And she just got caught in the crossfire and was the only one who got shot.
So she
in
wasn't
the head.
she wasn't the target.
She wasn't the target. So even if you wanted to make the argument, it's probably they may be black, but maybe it's their internalized white supremacy forced them to do it. No, it's nothing to do with that. The 4 suspects have denied conspiracy to murder 25-year-old Prince Dixon, 20-year-old Troy Reed, 19-year-old Cameron Derricks, and 19-year-old Devontae Brown had also pleaded not guilty to having a gun and ammunition with intent to endanger life. Now, I do not want to imply that these people are guilty. Obviously, legally speaking, we have no evidence and we cannot say so. These were the people who were arrested, rightfully or not, and held because they were suspected. It seemed to have some circumstantial evidence tying them to it, but we cannot say that these people are guilty because they have not gone through the trial process. So I'm not going to say that, but these are just the people who they had arrested and where some of the evidence seems to point towards. Hayward pointed to a falling out and hostility between Derricks and Brown, as well as the 2 youngest who were aged 18 occupying their property. There were previous incidents and a panic alarm had been installed at the family residence just days before the May 2021 shooting. So this sounds as though there was a lot of danger, known danger in that particular area, which makes it questionable as to why you would throw a house party outside, a silent disco where you're all wearing headphones so you can't actually hear anything if anybody's sneaking up on you, for instance. But once again, doesn't justify it. Access to the garden party was restricted by security at a side gate, and one of the attackers was carrying a handgun. Hayward said Johnson, who was attending the party, was in a relationship with the oldest son living there. 4 men were released, and the investigation continues. The mother of 2 has permanent and catastrophic injuries, police reported. Doctors have said it's a miracle that she's alive, and according to Johnson's family, while appealing for witnesses to speak out about the May 23rd, 2021 shooting, Metropolitan Police detectives say they've been met with silence. Detective Chief Inspector Nigel Penny, who's leading the investigation, said that many witnesses have refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Our biggest challenge is the wall of silence we have faced when appealing for witnesses. There were plenty of people there yet many have not been willing to speak with us. Johnson's mother, Ella Dalling, urged critical witnesses to come forward, declaring that the people that did this to Sasha need to come off the street. We need justice for Sasha, so please, I'm asking everyone at the party to come out and speak for Sasha. And she begged that to the witnesses. So much for holding the bad eggs accountable. Whether or not I think that Sasha was a bad person or not, once again, she did not deserve this. The people who did this are evidently violent people. They deserve to come off of the street, but because of the fact that within certain communities, probably pushed by people like Sasha, sadly, they have such a deeply held mistrust of the police and any sort of authority figure within the cultural hegemony that they exist within and try to exist outside of.
The legacy of the McPherson report, isn't it?
Yeah, they just don't want to cooperate, which honestly is not going to help anybody, because obviously the people who are most being hurt by this are the people within your own community.
Yeah.
The only way to fix this is to cooperate, whether or not that makes you a narc or a snitch or whatever, although I can also understand that there may be some level of intimidation going on in this situation.
Yeah.
The court heard as well that there was nothing to suggest that Johnson, a founding member of the Taking the Initiative party that emerged from the BLM movement, was targeted because of her prominence in the far-left activism scene. A friend of Johnson's told BBC News that she believed the incident was more related to rival gangs that clashed and that Johnson was not the intended target. So I think it's more to do with gangs or gang violence or rivalry or some type of dispute between two different groups. And the incident was not intended for Sasha as far as we are aware, as I am being told by closer friends and family. So it sounds, once again, she was a bystander who got caught in the crossfire and not the intended target. And just as a reminder of the sorts of views that Sasha held, Johnson had called for the abolishment of police, regime change in Britain, the removal of statues linked to slavery, and the enslavement of whites as reparations. So I do think she was a maniac, but definitely didn't deserve this. Just because I disagree with Johnson's activism and goals does not mean that her being shot in the head and left in this condition is justice. And she was a mother, and it doesn't mean that these people deserve to be let off without a trial. And if they are innocent of it, then the people who do know more information should come forward, because whether or not this was a nasty person they are still endangering other people just by being on the street, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they could even believe the same things that she does, but just kind of put it aside as they pursue their own ends in the drug war, whatever caused it.
Potentially. And the other thing you've got to remember is that Sasha Johnson was a radical, but there are other black radicals from the past who managed to reform themselves.
Yes.
Nobody is beyond redemption, unless, of course, you have gone so far as to callously murder an innocent person. There are people like Shelby Steele, who was a black radical as part of the 1960s student protest movement, who, took over his university and berated his lecturers and, did lots of bad stuff. But then he went on to sort of reform himself and become a much more moderate voice in terms of discussing race relations. He's got a good book called White Guilt, talking about blacks and whites destroying, racial relations in America. Yeah. And there are all other people like one of my favorites, Thomas Sowell, who I don't know if he was a radical, but he did used to be a Marxist, which I consider to be a more radical ideology.
It is.
And he was able to pull himself away from that. And eventually, Thomas Sowell is one of my favorite intellectuals, if you want to sort of smear him.
He wasn't a racial Marxist, though, was he? And he was very orthodox. Yeah.
Yes.
There is someone else you missed off that list.
Oh, who?
Stanley Hudson.
Oh, yeah.
An ex-member of the Black Panthers.
Yeah, if anybody remembers The Office, Stanley did used to be in the Black Panthers, and then by the time you see him in that show, he's not.
No.
He just doesn't want any of that BS. But what we can see here with the fact that until now, this whole thing has been ignored. Sasha Johnson's face and name has not been one of the remember their names. This is another example of black-on-black violence being downplayed. And we have plenty of other examples of it. You may remember last year, in April, the story of Makaya Bryant, which happened right before this did, where she was the girl who was about to stab one of her friends. I don't know if she was a friend, but supposedly over an argument over who would do the house cleaning. Right. She was in mid-stab in the motion. Police officer shoots her, and then everybody says, racist police officer. The police officer saved the life of a young black girl, and in doing so had to take the life of a young black girl who was about to become a murderer, was an attempted murderer. Apparently this was his racism that forced him to pull the trigger. Hours after crowds in Minneapolis celebrated the conviction of Derek Chauvin in the murder of George Floyd, a protest erupted in this Ohio city after a police officer shot and killed a black teenage girl who appears to have lunged at someone with a knife during a brawl. In an unusual move, Columbus police quickly released body cam footage of officers responding to a 911 call about an attempted stabbing and encountering 3 females fighting. If you have forgotten about this story, once again, this is an example where if the black person involved is in the wrong or is the one shooting, it doesn't matter what the context was, they will drop it because it doesn't matter. They are not looking for peace, they are not looking for a peaceful movement, they are looking for a movement that smears all white people with the same brush,
yes.
Or at least the ideologues at the top are who are directing these movements. Jack Posobiec was one to talk about this as well, pointing out that the Daily Beast said she had already dropped the knife in the yard, but police shot her 4 times without any warning. And somebody related to Bryant said, the police are going to lie. Well, I'm sorry, but images and footage doesn't lie. And you can see here, this is the footage, still of the footage, right before, I believe this is a split second before the shots were fired. You can see she's about to do that. If you watch the footage, I think it's still available online. She's in the motion and then gets shot, drops the knife. The man, the police officer, saved that girl's life.
But that wasn't the part that was reported.
No, well, it wasn't. Certainly wasn't at first. And as you'd imagine, as they always do, everybody immediately started making excuses. Move along. Brittany Cooper, black girl is dead because the cops brought a gun to a damn knife fight. If you don't know how to de-escalate teen girls who are fighting, maybe you shouldn't be a police officer. I said what I said. Honestly, I think these people, they watch way too many movies. Do they just expect police officers to be John Wick, to have lightning fast reflexes?
You're supposed to de-escalate situations by letting people stab each other first, Harry. Don't you remember?
Oh, I'm sorry. Once she's dead, it would have already de-escalated. So the problem would have solved itself, really. But seriously, are they expecting them to John Wick, like shoot a knife out of their hand without hurting anybody?
Wouldn't that be nice? But not.
And that real life doesn't work like that.
We don't all get to be Keanu Reeves.
And there were some of these reactions, they just go to show the extent at which people will make excuses when it's black on black violence, and when they want to blame somebody who is the white person in the situation, whether or not that person helped a black person in shooting them. Like, check this out, John. Cathy Griffin. John, if you want to click on the Cathy Griffin one. How in the hell does the police officer think it's a good idea to fire shots blindly into a group of teenagers having a fight? Yeah, one of them had a knife. Oh, that never happened in your school or neighborhood? She didn't deserve to die. It's just 16 years old. I don't care if she was 16 years old. She was about to murder somebody else who was probably also 16 years old.
Just a part of being in a bad neighborhood.
Obviously, you didn't grow up in an American public school. You didn't have knife fights with your friends. You know, you didn't play knifey spoony with all the lads at school.
No, you utter toff.
I know. I must be far too privileged. It was my white privilege protecting me from the knife fights. And the last one I just want to point out was one that Callum pointed out when this all went on. Amazing. Teenagers have been having fights, including fights involving knives, for eons. Yes. Whether or not that's a true statement or not, it's not a good thing. It doesn't mean we should keep letting them stab each other to death.
It's not exactly climbing a tree, is it?
We have this problem, you could say, in London.
Yeah.
And it's not a good problem to have. We don't want this. If I was about to be stabbed by someone, I would want them to shoot the person who's about to stab me and not just stand there and go, hold up, hold up, hold up. We can calm this down. Come on, lads. We can sort this out with words.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah, let's talk about this. No, shoot them. We do not need police to address these situations by showing up to the scene and using a weapon against one of the teenagers.
Yeah, we don't have to keep justifying that. We're not overreacting where we literally see gangs of machetes going at each other in the street.
This is honestly so shocking to me because
it's unbelievable.
Basically the ending of this line of logic is let them die. If it's black on black violence, just let them die. But then if that had happened, the police officer probably would have been accused of standing there and allowing it to happen. So it's a lose-lose situation.
You know what the end point of this is, and the implicit assumption all along, is that by intervening, you are racist.
Basically. But then if you don't intervene, you're also racist. So it's a catch-22, but Basically, to end all of this off, it's a sad state of affairs that in England and America, it seems that certain elements of black communities have problems with violence. And this causes problems, pain and hardship for the law-abiding people within those communities. A lot of these people don't want to have to deal with this, don't want to have to live in fear. Those people who have been silent towards the Sasha Johnson thing, they might be victims of intimidation and threats to their own life. But whether out of fear or misplaced loyalty, people don't speak up, but they need to if they want this to end.
Yeah.
And that's what I've got for that.
Well, no one deserves what Sasha Johnson got. Not even her.
Not even her.
Not even her.
You know, I'm not going to be so insensitive as to say that it was deserved on her part.
No,
I would say perhaps if in a different life, perhaps she could have reformed in the same way that someone like Shelby Steele did.
We never know. She might yet. She's still alive. There's time.
Well, with a big chunky brain missing like that, I'm sad to say that I don't think she'll be making any kind of significant recovery.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as our interview with Andy No, this one being Tea Time with Andy No between Carl and Andy, of course. And if you want to follow Andy, you can always follow him on Getter at Mr. Andy No. Thank you and goodbye.